Hello guys, Aquano here, back for another video on the Dragon Quest III HD-2D Remake. And today, let's talk about what kind of party you should aim for. Now, I need to preface that this video is not here to tell you what class start with. There's probably many videos about starting composition. I think everything can work, honestly, in the early game. So, I'm here to talk about parties that you can finish the game with. Parties that are good for the final boss in the game or even for the post game. Parties that you can aim for no matter what you start with. No matter what class you chose, you can say, oh, these classes are good in late game. Maybe I should change this one into this one, change this one into this one, and then kind of like plan your party for the late game. This is what this video is for. Now, keep in mind that these are just recommendations. The possibilities are endless. So let me know what party you guys beat the game with, if I didn't mention it here. I'm going to mention some really good classes for the late game, and then use these classes to make a bunch of potential end game compositions. Now, let's get right on with it. Now, let's start by making a distinction between early game classes and classes that are better either in the late game or during the entirety of the game. That's because party composition, if we're talking about the late game, the final boss, there are some classes we kind of need to not take into account. Not because they're not viable. You know, some classes are very good, but they're viable, but they should not be your final destination, you know? Kind of more like a stepping stone. An obvious example is the Gadabout, you know? The Gadabout is more of a stepping stone than a final destination, obviously. But some other examples are less obvious, like the Merchant and the Priest, which are classes that I recommend for the early game. Now, like I said, you can definitely finish the game with the Merchant, especially with a Priest. This is a class that can carry you through the entire game. It learns a lot of useful stuff. But transitioning away from them after learning what you need is probably the best option. Now, this is also the case for the Mage, but a bit less. I feel like the Mage is there's more arguments for him to be your final destination than Gadabout, Merchant, and Priest. But I'm personally not a big fan of how squishy the Mage is. So if you transition your Priest into a Mage to have a party member that has all the spells, just make them something else in the late game. And then have another party member be the Sage to have two party members with all the spells. This is a pretty good setup. Now, speaking of the Sage is a must for the final boss, especially if you don't want to keep a Priest around for the game. The Sage learns so many spells that are almost required to beat the final boss and the post game comfortably. Spells that boost your magic defense, that make you immune to breath spells. Oomph, which the Mage also learns, but you can get it with the Sage if you want to. Oomph is a spell that boosts the attack power of another party member or any party members. So the Sage, we need to start by saying that the Sage is obviously one of the best, if not the best contender for a late game party member. Now, a second class that I want to talk about that is, in my opinion, a must. Well, one of the best classes for the late game, and that is the Martial Artist. The Martial Artist with Wildside has one of the biggest DPS potential in the game. Wildside is the ability that the Monster Wrangler gets after you collect 50 docile monsters. It's the famous ability that makes you act twice for a couple turns. You couple that with the high DPS potential of the Martial Artist and its critical hits, you get a monster to beat bosses quickly. Another class I want to talk about is the Monster Wrangler. The Monster Wrangler is probably the best class in the mid and late game, honestly, as long as you invest in finding monsters. You can just find a bunch of monsters, spam Monster Pylon, and get some of the best damage in the mid game and early late game. Now, Monster Pylon probably gets outscaled in the post game if you didn't find too many monsters. But if you're determined to find all the monsters, then this is definitely one of the best class, if not the best class in the game. It gets a bit of everything. Now, the Warrior. The Warrior is also a class I can recommend for the late game because it's Yes, a lot of people have been saying that the warrior is a bit underwhelming compared to other late game classes, and you would be right. But I feel like it has a lot of value just from the fact that it's the only tank class in the game. So if you want a tanky character, maybe like transitioning away from the priest to warrior to make a very tanky healer is a very good choice. Now, before I go next, I want to mention a very weird slash special class, and that is the thief. The thief, a lot of people think that it's a utility class, and you would be right. The thief is utility class, but it's not only good in the early game. Thief is a very, very good contender for the final party party, and that's because of its speed stat and its versatility in terms of stat growth. The thief can become the final destination of pretty much anything. You want a fast monster wrangler after learning all the spells you want, thief is a good decision. If you want a fast sage after learning all the spells you wanted, thief is a good decision. Like, thief is a really, really good party member for a multitude of reasons. He's also very good to farm seeds, but that's kind of like more on the tryhard side if you want to do a lot of grinding. But either way, I wanted to mention the separately because of how interestingly good it is. Because, you know, at first glance, it seems like an early game class. It seems like a purely utility class. But when you think about how useful the agility stat is and how versatile the thief can be, it is a very good class. It can equip a lot of different type of weapons, a lot of different type of gear, and yeah, it's a very solid choice. Don't sleep on the thief just because it has lower damage potential than other classes. Now, I've been mentioning all these classes because I really want you guys to know why they're good. But now we're going to talk about how to make a party out of all these classes. Now, how do you go about making a party, a fully functioning party, out of all these good classes I mentioned? Well, you need to think about roles. So you need party members to do a lot of damage, and you need party members to survive. If you're able to survive the waves of damage the enemy is unleashing on you, and you're able to do a lot of DPS fast enough to not die, you have a good party. So for supportive capabilities, thankfully we already have the hero, which you don't have a choice to play, already has revive, a bunch of heals, and stuff like that. Now the problem is that the hero lacks in terms of buffs and ailment cleansing, which means the sage or someone who comes from who transitioned away from priest is a really good choice. Now, if you want a supportive party member, I feel like the paladin, which is a priest turned into a warrior, or a sage should definitely have one of these two in your party. That's what I want to say. You should definitely have one of these two in your party, or maybe a fast healer as a thief. So keep in mind, you want a second supportive party member in your party because the hero is not enough. Now, the two other slots, you have multiple options. Either have a magic DPS and a physical DPS, or only have one DPS and bring a second supportive member. So an ideal party would be like hero with a sage, and then a martial artist for DPS, and then maybe a mage turned thief for a magic DPS. So just keep in mind when you make your final party to have a balance between damage and support. For example, if you gave a lot of offensive seeds to your hero, maybe having two supportive party members plus a DPS is better than having two DPS and a supportive party member. So let me give you an example of an ideal party for the final boss. The hero, a sage with a lot of healing and buffs, a monster wrangler that transitioned away from priest or a thief or merchant with some supportive capabilities, but also good DPS with a monster pylon if you are during a turn when you don't need much healing. And then your last party member is like your primary DPS. Either a magic one through the mage. I know people like the mage, but I personally recommend the martial artist as your dedicated DPS. Someone who's gonna do two things: either defend when he's very low HP, or attack. Most of the time, attack. This is a very, very easy class to play. Every turn you attack. If your party is low, if you need defense, if you need buffs, it's the job of the other party members, the 3 others, the hero and the 2 others. This, you definitely need one party member who's gonna hit every single turn. A dedicated DPS is definitely required for a balanced party. Now, like I said, I mentioned a lot of possibilities to fill these roles, but keep in mind that you need to fill these roles one way or another. So make sure to use your own critical thinking. Think about all the possibilities I gave you. Think about what you already have in your party and what you should aim for to make a balanced party composition. It was Aquano. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.